I want to touch on a number of interesting articles today that was put out by various sources. Today it's basically a look at the common sense moves that are being made that seem to be shaping what will happen in the future of Bible prophecy. And that's basically what I do. I try to stay away from sensational topics and articles and things of that nature because I know basically that that's being covered already by many others out in the YouTube and internet community. But I like to stay away from that kind of thing because for the most part it simply never comes to pass. And the problem with many prophecy websites and YouTube channels or other sources like that is that they will read an article and they will start reading things into it without doing any background intelligence reporting to see why this simply cannot happen. Case in point, I'm sure that there were some dolphins that I believe it was dolphins that have died mysteriously over the last several months, a considerable amount more than normal. And I'm sure that many have tried to pick up on that and have called it something prophetic. But the bottom line is that scientists now have found out that simply they had been victim of some type of disease or whatever the case may be, and that was the reason for the deaths. I heard another report where a guy said that Facebook was down for 4 hours, and he tried to link that to Bible prophecy. This happened a few months ago, and I'm thinking to myself, how in the world do people buy these types of things? But they do. They seem to flock to those types of areas. But I don't get into that, and you're probably not going to ever hear me start trying to connect dots together without doing some type of intelligence research. Like I said, if it's something that is a little far-fetched, I'll probably stay astray from it. But here's an article that's coming out of Stratford, and it says Iran and Syria smuggling weapons to gain influence in the West Bank. And the article basically summarizes, it says there are growing indications that Iran, Syria, and their local proxies may be attempting to build up militant capabilities in the West Bank to eventually threaten Israel. Physically transferring weapons into Fatah-controlled West Bank will remain a key challenge, as recent arrests of weapons smugglers in Jordan have shown. Though Iran and Syria face many constraints in trying to spread militancy to the West Bank, their quiet efforts are worth noting, particularly as Hamas and Iran are finding reasons to repair their relationship after a period of strain. And these weapons smugglers are basically coming out of Jordan. But Stratford has found from its own contacts that these smugglers are actually Palestinians from Syria who are affiliated with the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine General Command. The suspects allegedly were carrying weapons obtained from Syria, from a Syrian army houses in Sweden, southwest Syria. They basically have been transporting through Jordan from the Syrian border southward to Karka, to circumvent the large security presence around the Jordan River Valley. And you can bet once this West Bank nation of Palestine is created, this will become a huge problem for Israel. And even though the United States and probably European Union and a number of other entities will guarantee Israel's safety and security, it's still going to be a problem, and it's going to lead up to what I believe will be the Battle of Gog and Magog, in which Russia will come down upon Israel through Syria. And I'm sure that Iran will also come down through the West Bank and also through Syria as well. Now here's another article coming out of Stratford that talks about Russia's growing Muslim population. It says, while Russia's overall population is dropping, the number of Muslims in the country is on the rise. The population of indigenous Muslims, mainly hailing from the Russian Caucasus, in Russia has risen since the fall of the Soviet Union, including a 69% increase in Dagestanis, a 50% increase in Chechens, and a 100% increase in Ingush. Similarly, the number of Muslim immigrants is also rising. According to the official state data, The some 240,000 immigrants enter Russia annually. Russia's Center for Migration Studies puts this number at at more than 400,000 after accounting for illegal immigration. And the Federal Migration Service has said that 3 million immigrants work illegally in Russia every year, so add that to the number. Of course, not all of them are Muslim, but the good portion are. And this has been going on for many, many years, where the state of Russia has increasingly become more Muslim, and I looked for that to continue. And I also look for that to play a major factor in why Russia does come down. But the Bible does still say in Ezekiel 38 that Russia's main motivation for attacking Israel will be to take a spoil. But I think because of this Muslim presence that there will be many participants who will be more than willing to go down and destroy Israel. So what does this prove? Well, it proves that the extra biblical data of today is beginning to support what the Bible has to say in Ezekiel 38 and 39. And these are the things that you need to look at when determining what is true and what is not true, maybe, and what is a little bit on the sensationalist or fantasy side. Now I want to move to an article that is entitled Arab Chaos, How Much Does It Matter? Now this is written by Robert D. Kaplan, and it states that chaos is sweeping the Arab world. Tunisia is in political disarray and can barely control its borders. Libya hardly exists. Tripoli is not the capital of a country, but the weak point of arbitration for tribes and militias in far-flung desert reaches. Egypt wallows in a political stasis in which the government has trouble functioning. Ideological divisions between the military and Islamists split the country, and guns and vigilantism abound. The Sinai Peninsula has become a mini Afghanistan, and the territory of Yemen may, on a good day, control half of its territory. Syria is in a full-fledged civil war with over 100,000 dead. Iraq, too, barely exists as a state, and low intensity of violence there is a feature of life. Bahrain and Jordan are much weaker states compared to previous decades. Significantly, none of this anywhere will be solved anytime soon. Now, of course, this chaos is a recipe for disaster when it comes to groups like Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah, or whatever the case may be, who thrive on weakening governments. And for that matter, even the Muslim Brotherhood. Now, here's something I found very interesting. It says transnational jihadists, such as groups like Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda, currently establishing themselves throughout the Middle East, are primarily a threat to their host governments, such as they still exist. Yet, from the American perspective, the greatest security threat to the regional balance of power is not so much a chaotic state as a stable and strongly governed one, Iran. Iran, precisely because it is not in chaos, is now able to develop a nuclear capacity through a sophisticated and dispersed network of facilities that the Americans and Israelis have found difficult to dismantle without going to war. Would only Iran have been in chaos for years now, then its nuclear program would likely not be so far along. Because Iran is both radical and strongly governed, Israel's security is fundamentally undermined, even as chaos elsewhere in the Middle East has been in some ways favorable to Israel. The Israeli military recently announced that that because militaries in Egypt and Syria, as well as other Arab states, no longer present a conventional threat to its territory, Israel now has the luxury to concentrate more on unconventional threats like guerrilla infiltration and cyber attacks. Thus, thanks to chaos in the Arab world, Israel no longer faces a strategic threat on its borders. Rather, the threat has deteriorated to a tactical one. Hezbollah and Hamas cannot send tanks into Israel's population zones like Egypt and Syria. back when they were strongly governed states, were once theoretically able to do so. So I find it interesting that Stratford believes that Israel is probably more stable and safe under chaotic conditions than it would be if these nations were governed by very strong leadership. But I do have to say it does make a lot of sense. Now that's not to say there aren't security challenges for Israel. There certainly are. But when Egypt and Syria and even Jordan and other places in the area are being laid waste and being attacked by militants throughout the area, that takes away what could be taking place in Israel, number one, and number two, these countries that were possible threats to Israel are simply too busy taking care of business in their own nations in order to be a threat to Israel at this point in time. But the important part that you want to note is that even if militants were to take over places such as Syria or the West Bank or Egypt, or whatever the case may be, they're in no shape to be rolling into Israel and attacking Israel. When Israel is potentially overthrown with Ezekiel 38 and 39, it will be by a major nation and not by a bunch of, like I said, rock-throwing, stick-carrying militants who, such as the Muslim Brotherhood or whatever the case may be. They're simply not powerful enough. They're not rolling tanks into Israel as stated in the article. They do serve as an irritant to Israel, but they're simply not powerful enough to take and destroy Israel. That will have to be done, like I said, by a legitimate, powerful government. Now moving on to the U.S. and Iran, and the article states as why they will likely negotiate. As you know, Iran and the U.S. have been at odds with each other for many years. Now, much of the rhetoric is at face value. In other words, much of what you hear is a lot of noise. And here's something you probably don't know. It says Iran severed diplomatic ties with the United States in 1979 and has been opposed to restoring them. So basically it's been on Iran's part that diplomatic ties have not been restored to the United States. For its part, the United States has offered to normalize relations on several occasions, but Iran has rebuffed all such offers. According to Tehran, Washington must first change its attitude toward Iran, a diplomatic way of saying the United States must accept the country as it is. But here's probably the more likely reason why that they have not mended ties with the United States. But for several years, other factors have informed Iranians' objections. It says since the mid-1990s, Iran has been politically incoherent. Over the past 16 years, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei has been at odds with Rouhani's two predecessors. He distrusted Mohammad Khatami's reformism, and he went through an outright power struggle with Mahmoud Ahmadinejad. During this time, Iran was thus unable or unwilling to negotiate substantively with the West. In any case, its relative economic vitality meant that Iran never had to engage the United States directly, opting for local back-channel negotiations instead. And here's something you probably should also be aware of, that Iran helped the United States, the Bush administration, to topple Saddam Hussein. They played a major role in helping to topple Saddam, and also was very influential in helping to wrest power from the Taliban in Afghanistan. So even though you've heard a lot of harsh rhetoric toward the Iranian regime, in the back secret offices, they have been working together to some degree. And that's usually the way it is. You're going to hear things going on and being said out in public for the sake of the public and the people. But there could very well be much more cooperation being displayed behind the scenes. And that goes for Israel and Egypt, Israel and Jordan, and other places who have said some things over the years that you would think they were mortal enemies, but the bottom line is that they cooperate a whole lot more than you think they do. Now here's some of the reasons why they did not normalize relations. It says, notably, the Bush and Obama administration offered to normalize relations with Iran, but Tehran rejected them for two reasons. First, Iranian leaders believed that normalized relations with Washington would make it easier for the United States to subvert the regime. Second, no one in Tehran could agree on how to manage relations with Washington. Now, what they could agree on was that they would not normalize relations with the United States as Libya had in 2003 when it scrapped its weapons of mass destruction program and in essence skewed to Western policies toward the region. Tehran's political leaders may differ ideologically, but they all see Iran as a regional and international player, and they do not want to sacrifice their geopolitical ambitions for saving face in the international community. More important, acquiring nuclear weapons capability is seen as a deterrent against any efforts of regime change and as a means for achieving Iran's geopolitical imperatives. Now, to make a long story short on this article, it states that sanctions have definitely put a dent into Iran's reserves. This has got Iran's attention, and they definitely want to change the direction of their economic future. Now, fortunately, Mr. Ahmadinejad has left, and now Mr. Rouhani has taken his place, and he is more in line with what the supreme leader wants to do. So under the incoming Rouhani administration, Tehran's political establishment is likely to see an end to the infighting that has plagued them for the last 2 decades. Coupled with a dire economic situation, political coherence will likely lead to substantive U.S.-Iranian negotiations. Now, what Stratford finally says, it says, Iran's decision to negotiate does not mean that an accommodation is imminent, but it is nonetheless a major development. So they do believe that at some point in time that Iran will come to some type of agreement. I believe the United States will also come to that agreement and eventually normalize relationships, because they did want to normalize relations under 2 different administrations. And I don't necessarily believe that it will be that the ceasing of their nuclear activities will be the key. I think the United States will probably allow them to, at some point, continue their nuclear program as long as it does not develop into a nuclear weapon, at least not on the surface. They may even allow them to continue their nuclear program and monitor it so that possibly it does not ever become a functional nuclear weapon. I don't know. That's speculation on my part, but at some point in time, I do believe that they are going to normalize relations with Iran, and Israel is going to have to live with it, and the United States or a European Union will guarantee their security. Now, moving on to the Middle East talks between Israel and Palestine. Of course, there are many things that could cause problems, but Mr. Kerry is United States Secretary of State. Mr. Kerry is very confident that he thinks he can get this done. And what the article says, the talks may fail. Many issues could serve as stumbling blocks. The issue of borders will have to be discussed at length. Land swap arrangements considered fair by both sides will have to be found. These would allow Israel to maintain control of major Israeli settlements beyond the Green Line, while compensating the Palestinians with land elsewhere. Right of return issues will require some plan for compensation. Israel will not grant permission to hundreds of thousands of Palestinians to migrate back to Israel, but Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas probably cannot sign off on any agreement that does not at least symbolically respond to this issue. Perhaps trickiest of all is Jerusalem, which both sides claim as their capital and where Israel already maintains its seat of government. And this is exactly what the Bible says, that Israel will become a major stumbling block in the last days that many will try to solve, but in the end will be crushed to powder, as found in Zechariah 12:3. There have been suggestions throughout the years of dividing the city in half, with the historical and sacred Old City being placed under international administration. But besides the difficult logistics involved, it will be nearly impossible for Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu to cede any part of Jerusalem that Israel reclaimed in the 1967 war, especially since Israeli law requires a national referendum on any peace treaty that gives away part of Jerusalem. And it will be equally hard for Abbas to compromise on Palestinian possession of Al-Quds. Now, there are also internal disagreements and problems for both Netanyahu that he has to deal with politically and for Mr. Abbas. That will also serve as a problem in getting this deal done. Certainly there are many on the Israeli and on the Palestinian side who never want peace or never want a state to be created and are going to be enemies for life. Now, skipping down in the article, it says, none of this is to say that an agreement is imminent or that Kerry's plan will work. Stratford wrote Tuesday that it was extremely skeptical of the potential for these talks to succeed, and it is premature to be optimistic about them. Netanyahu will face serious opposition from the right wing in Israel, and memories of the assassination of Yitzhak Rabin will likely mark the public dialogue if the Israelis start talking about real concessions. Abbas will have his own security issues to worry about, and he will not be immune from the inevitable blowback from Gaza and from unsympathetic parties in the Fatah West Bank. The last time there was a feeling of genuine optimism around peace talks was the July 2000 Camp David summit, where Bill Clinton brought then Israeli Prime Minister Ehud Barak together with Arafat and came close to getting both sides to agree to a peace agreement. After those talks collapsed, the Second Intifada erupted, a period during which attacks such as the Hebrew University bombing profoundly affected many who had thought peace was nigh. However genuine the intentions of the actors engaged in talks, the violence of the Second Intifada provides a cautionary reminder of what could happen should the talks fail. And this indeed could be what plays out in the end of the U.S.-led talks, where a possible third Intifada could either be being threatened or could break out, prompting the European Union to step in and to try to solve this process. Of course, that is a speculation that on my part, but I do believe, as I've said many times, that I think the United States will probably walk away from the talks in the Middle East and will turn it over to the European Union, or at least allow them to lead the effort. And at some point in time, once the rapture of the church takes place, I believe the Antichrist will come forward and he will lead this peace process, and it will become successful. And, as you can see, these are simply steps that are leading toward an end goal, and I should say a biblical end goal. And it is subtle and it is somewhat gradual, as you can see. And even though many prophecy watchers try to fill in the subtlety with sensational events, I don't do that. I believe that it will probably be, the Bible says in many places that the world will go on as normal until sudden destruction comes upon mankind, as it did in the days of Noah, where men and women were marrying and giving in marriage. In other words, they were carrying on the natural, everyday activities of life until sudden destruction overtook them. I simply believe that's probably what's going to happen as we see things leading up. Yes, there will be birth pangs, and there have been birth pangs that are taking place, but I still believe that they are to the point of being subtle. But there will come a time, as the Bible has said, where the birth pangs will be more immense and very powerful, and that's when sudden destruction will fall. But that will come sometime during the tribulation period. But we have to be reminded, and we have to remember that life will, the Bible has said very plainly that life will be very, very normal up until the time sudden destruction does take place. Now, how do we reconcile that with the rapture of the church taking place in between that time and sudden destruction? Well, as I've said many times in articles, I believe that when the rapture does take place, that this world will be chaotic. But I believe the Antichrist will come on the scene, and he will control the fears that the people have. Of course, many will see this as the rapture of the church. But just as 9/11 calmed down after the fact, I believe that this event will be calmed. The fears of this event will be calmed by the rise of the Antichrist. But from that day forward, life will never be the same, and this will now become a supernatural world that will lead right into the events of the tribulation period. And if you don't know the Lord, you're going to live through this period known as the tribulation period. It's the most horrible time the world has ever known. The Bible calls it a dark and gloomy time. It is a time in which the vast majority of the population of this world will be destroyed, and that God will rain down his wrath upon this world. But there's something even worse than that, and that is dying and going to hell. You may not even see the tribulation period. You may die before that day comes. 150,000 people do every single day. And the vast majority of those people will die and go to hell. And the bad part about that is that they're dying and going to hell with their sins paid for. Don't let that happen to you. Accept the Lord as Savior today. This is Terry Malone with the Calvary Prophecy Report.